Hello and good afternoon to all of you. My name is Marco Torregrossa. And first, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me and apologize for not being with you in beautiful Tunisia today. So I hope you had a good conference so far and enjoyed being part of this amazing Tunisian Freelancers Day. In the next 20-30 minutes, I'd like to take you through my vision for a future of work, which is shaped by freelancers. So without further ado, let's begin. There you go. Yes, here we are. So first, I'd like to start with a little anecdote. One headline took my interest a couple of months ago, and it was saying that the rush hour is dead, or at least so they discovered at the New York subway system. So why did that happen? The subway administrators were puzzled, and they surveyed commuters asking why. Aren't you going to work any longer? They asked. Is it because the subway tickets are perhaps getting too expensive, or perhaps even gasoline price went down and now you're all using your cars instead? No, the most common answer was, I now have flexible arrangements at work. I go to the office whenever I want. So what's happening here? This is happening, okay? People want to work and live differently. So we finally understood that work doesn't happen at work. So work is increasingly both everywhere and nowhere, more deeply embedded in our lives than ever before, but disappearing as a specific activity. So now technology might be the great enabler here, but I think the impulse is deeply human. So we want to work and live a life on our own terms. So we can say no to hierarchies, and we can live our lives free from long commutes, office politics, bossy bosses, or dress codes. So remember, the polite question to ask these days is not where do you work, but what are you working on? Now, seriously, I can bother you with endless statistics and sensational headlines like this one in the last few months, but seriously, I won't be doing just that. Just trust me, an increasing amount of people are now switching to work for themselves and become their own bosses. And this growth of freelancers in Europe has far outpaced the growth of any other relevant segment of the European labor market, like, for instance, employees or traditional entrepreneurs, until we reach the year 2027. So remember my words, the year 2027 will be a historical moment. Why? Because in 2027, the number of people doing freelance work on the side, either on the side or as a main activity, will grow and grow and grow. You can see the line in orange here, and will overtake the number of employees, which is decreasing, decreasing, and decreasing. You can see that with the line in light blue. So freelancers will become the majority in the labor market in America for the first time in history. And I think the rest of the world is to follow. We can't really escape that. So why is this happening? We are in the middle of a massive shift, which I call the shortening of work. Okay, so you see things are getting shorter, like the length of the contract itself. Protections are getting more restricted and looser and less defined places where to work. But now let's move on and focus on this fourth column, which are the freelancers. Okay, so who are freelancers really? I define freelancers as highly skilled and well-educated self-employed workers without employees nor employers. So these are the so-called own account workers. But first, let me tell you actually what freelancers are not. They are not all the Steve Jobs type of entrepreneurs, so the tech startups in the garage, or those with an idea that will change the world and make them rich. Freelancers are people who care about their autonomy and independence much more than fast revenue generation or growth or hiring and managing other people. So independent work has these defining features: a high degree of autonomy, it's a payment by tasks, taking on business risk, a short-term relationship with their clients, and perhaps the most important, freelancers measure growth in unconventional ways. Now, combining all of these criteria helps to identify a freelancer as someone who chooses how much to work, where to work, who can move between assignments fluidly, and has multiple clients. So ultimately, freelancers are their own bosses. Now, let's have a look at some categories here. So the first are the traditional full-time freelancers. The second is what I call the moonlighters, the individuals which are supplementing their income, doing some sort of freelance work on the side. And this is the largest segment in the European Union. Then you have the temps, although this category is highly contentious because these people can also be either employees or agency workers, etc. And finally, what is common in countries like the UK or the US, you have incorporated freelancers, so those trading by a limited company. But now let's have a look at some statistics here. First, it's important that the total number of freelancers in the European Union is now 10.8 million and not 9.6, because we have now updated figures. So the age, the majority of the EU 28 freelancers fall into the 25-49 age groups, and freelancers tend to be older than the equivalent sector employees. So there's much higher proportion of freelancers who are over 65. And this somehow is to be expected, as older workers are more likely to desire the flexibility of working alone, and work-life balance becomes more important with age. The gender, there's an overall balance in the gender split, although the number of female freelancers is actually growing much faster than males, and 1 out of 6 is actually a working mother. The growth in the last 10 years in Europe, freelance now represent the segment of the labor market that has experienced the highest growth, with a 24% increase. Now, the growth in the number of freelancers has been fairly strong across all sectors. But the education sector, the one in the middle, has seen the most significant and rapid growth, closely followed by the human health and social services sector, whereas the largest growth in absolute terms was in the professional, scientific, and technical activities sector, which amounts for 500,000 of freelancers in Europe, and where the majority of freelancers in Europe are working. Now, there is a substantial variation in the number of freelancers in each country. More than half of the European freelancers population is concentrated in just 3 countries: the UK, Italy, and Germany. However, it's important to note that this does not appear as though the number of freelancers correlates strongly with the proportion of the workforce which is self-employed. So in some countries like the UK or the Netherlands, there is a strong relationship, but there are opposing examples such as Greece, okay, where the self-employed make up a significant contribution, so they're 32%, but freelancers, so the highly skilled self-employed, are just the 6%. Now, in the past, a freelancer was just a mercenary, so someone with a slightly bad reputation. But today, the reality is different. So there is no such thing really as the typical freelancers. Freelancers are a very heterogeneous group. It's a very diverse group in a constantly evolving environment, and this diversity actually makes it very difficult to forge a united voice that compels attention, or to regulate the sector, for instance. So I just put down examples on these slides very randomly. this is just to say that from A to Z, from archivist to zoologist, every profession could be freelance. Okay, you can think of the fitness trainer that comes to your place, give you a massage, and tomorrow comes to mine, etc. So these people include men and women. They represent a diversity of ethnical backgrounds and political orientation. They live all over the country, not just in major cities. But now, the emergence of this new reality of work can actually be traced back to a series of developments that took place over the past 20 years, like globalization, the technological revolution, increased mobility, or demographic changes. Now, collectively, these forces give rise to an overall trend in freelance working. As a result, work is more accessible than ever, but it's coming in different forms. Rather than a single job from a single employer, we now have access to many jobs from many sources in many shapes and sizes. Okay, in other words, the things we've come to think as the components of a job aren't necessarily bound together. So each of these components shown on these slides are in fact becoming available from new places, and we are able to bound them together in new ways. Because you see, work hasn't really changed, or work hasn't been challenged over the past 100 years, since the Industrial Revolution, when people were going to factories. So the way we've been thinking and doing work for 100 years is pretty much the same way as we're doing things today. So in the area of Henry Ford, the salaried work employment was a bundle, okay, so with many benefits attached. But by contrast, the self-employed workers often lack all of these things that were common in the Henry Ford era in the United States. So I think the future of freelance work depends on our collective capacity to secure this new bundle, okay, for the self-employed. And if we succeed, freelance work will indeed rise and become more of a norm in the labor market. If we fail, unfortunately, its promise will never be fulfilled, and we will pay the price in the form of less work and less economic development. But now, today, the employment market is actually volatile, is fast-moving, in a constant state of flux. So the average working life includes period as an employee, some years of self-employment, and inevitably also times of unemployment. But I know what you're thinking now. You're thinking, so as a freelancer, how can I possibly get a mortgage, or how can I raise my kids? How do I ever feel secure? So unfortunately, it's not all sunshine. And sadly, the world of freelancing is still a very chaotic place. Because for many successful engagement, there will be 3 failed ones, due to late payments, contract disputes, and other problems. So there are a number of pain points that are afflicting freelancers, and these problems are purely the symptoms of what I call 3 underlying challenges. The first is the lack of regulation. So the legislation designed specifically for freelance work is virtually non-existent, okay, across the world, right? So although, for example, freelance platforms have their basic rules in place, they are rarely comprehensive enough to be effective. The second problem is what I call the borderless market. So freelancers, while freelancing doesn't necessarily equal remote work, but the jobs in the most popular categories like software development or design can easily be done without a physical presence. Now, this removal of geographical restriction somehow has introduced a new set of challenges, such as the contract enforcement or the lack of it, cultural misunderstanding, or these bidding wars between freelancers in developed and developing economies. And the third problem is what I call subjective success. So unlike ordering a pizza via an app, yes, so which you can determine success by looking at whether the correct order was delivered promptly. Now, the success of a freelance project is often subjective. So when success cannot be defined objectively, of course, disputes will naturally arise. Now, despite these problems, a number of countries have come up with good practices, okay, in regulating self-employment and freelance work. So let me take you through some of them. Well, the first one is the Freelance Isn't Free Act. This is a law to enhance and protect the rights of freelance workers, which came into effect in New York in 2017. So for freelancers, the act means that they now have the right to a written contract, the right to be paid timely and in full, and the right to be free of retaliation from their client. Second, the definition of independent workers in law. So countries like Belgium, but also Spain, Italy, and many others have attempted to define independent work in law by creating a statute of independent workers. Now, the purpose was to give additional statutory rights to independent workers, which they would otherwise not be eligible to exercise given their lack of employment status, and also outlines some criteria for the labor courts to distinguish between legitimate and false self-employment. Then we have third category of workers between employees and the self-employed. Like in Germany in 1999, they passed the Act to promote self-employment. This act was very important. It contained, for the first time, statutory rights and criteria to introduce a new category of workers, the economically dependent workers. So those who derive the most of their self-employed income from only one client. Then you have the redress obligation of platforms in the EU. The EU Commission adopted last year a proposed regulation aiming at promoting more transparency for platforms. So accordingly, platforms are now required to implement a set of measures to ensure effective redress mechanism in the contractual relationship with their online business user, and some of them are self-employed professionals, so who use these platforms to sell their services to customers in Europe. Then in France, you have the auto-entrepreneur scheme, which is designed to make it easier to become self-employed or earn a second income as self-employed. The auto-entrepreneur status can be combined with unemployment status, and social security charges are paid at a flat rate, which means it only applies if people actually earn any money. Then in Germany, you have something called the freelance visa, which allows third-party nationals or non-EU to live and work freely in the professions of their choosing as a self-employed in Germany. Now, the freelancer limited liability company, it's actually a proposal which is currently discussed in the UK government to create a vehicle for all legitimate freelancers to use without being caught by the self-employment rules, the false self-employment rules in the UK. Then you have the portability of Social Security benefits, which is the ability for self-employed workers to preserve, maintain, and transfer the acquired Social Security rights, such as pension, unemployment, sickness, etc., from one private or public Social Security scheme to another, okay, regardless of whom they are working for and on what terms. Then again, in Belgium, you have something called voucher-based work, which is a form of work where an employer buys a voucher from a third party, which is usually a governmental authority, to be used as payment for a service from a worker rather than cash. And often the service providers are fixed-term tasks related to casual work, domestic work, or agriculture, which are areas with a lot of undeclared work. Then you have the Social Security dialogue in the Netherlands, which follows a tripartite structure that includes the two social partners, which are the employers and the unions and the government, of course, but also some civil society body, like, for example, the Social and Economic Council. Now, as part of their affiliation to this body, the self-employed representatives can participate to the social dialogue in countries like the Netherlands. And finally, we have a gig economy training toolkit, which is a freelancing course launched by the city of San Francisco in 2017, offering guidelines on pricing, on training, how to be a good freelancer, and how to find work on platforms. And the very last one is the one-stop shop for occasional shows in France, which is an interesting social security contribution that to ease the social security contributions that a lot of entertainment providers have to provide to their own workers in the creative and entertainment sector. So to ease the administrative requirement and to make it easier to pay their workers in this sector. Now we have a number. Now from these good practices, we can derive a number of policy recommendations, right? So first, we can't achieve recognition, okay, unless we have a definition of freelancers that reflects the reality of self-employment. So for the purpose, at least in Europe, for the purpose of the European SME definition, we'd like freelancers to be defined as a subcategory of the micro-enterprise. For your info, the micro-enterprise are the ones with less than 10 employees and less than 1 million euro turnover per year. Second, we want policymakers to calculate properly freelancers, so the highly skilled self-employed workers, in national statistics as to validate the growing size of our demographic and count things like not only the number of jobs, but also and specifically the number of hours worked. Then we want regulators to produce better regulation and simplified policy that specifically considers the unique needs of freelancers and introduce thresholds and exemptions as applicable. Now, point 4, it's the topic of access. This is strictly related to Article 49 of the Treaty of the European Union that states the right to take up and pursue activities as self-employed. However, there are a number of recurrent problems that freelancers face, and these are mostly related to access, okay? Access condition in terms of, in relation to work, in relation to markets, public procurement, finance, social security, training, infrastructure, and tax benefits that should be available, we say, should be available to freelancers at the same levels and conditions of employees. Now we want the nomination of our representatives that could champion the cause of freelancers in government and breaks through the silos approach that many governmental departments have in regulating freelancers in conflicting ways. Finally, we want governments to commission research that investigate the diversity of self-employment and does not put all freelancers in the same box, so they can be properly divided in the genuine self-employed, in the false self-employed, and protect those that fall into vulnerable situations. Now, I want to share with you some reflections related to local economic development, because I think it's very important. And the open question that I'm throwing at you now is, what would happen to our cities if we were all freelancers? Now, I have a small animation here, which unfortunately does not work, I realize. So nevertheless, I'll explain it to you, even though you will see it static, okay? So first, here on the left, you have the potential of local economic boost. So imagine if people spend money in non-urban areas, they buy coffee in the local cafeteria instead of downtown Starbucks, the local incomes would go up and there would be more work for the local residents. Then we have a work-life balance. So by working in a flexible way, parents will have more time to spend with their children and their families. Then It's where people work. So with freelancers' ability to work from wherever they want, options such as home office and co-working space will become more and more available. Then we have where people live. So as work becomes decoupled from physical location, there won't be any longer overcrowded or expensive areas, and people will live wherever they wish. Then how people get around. Okay, so there will be no more commuting, no more time lost to go to work, with fewer cars on the road, more public transport, and less pollution. And here is about local services. Okay, so this is the rise in delivery services and drones, transportation. Things will come to you instead of you going to things. So you can see in this picture, for example, there is a car with a doctor coming to your home rather than you going to the doctor. So finally, here are two pieces of wisdom from the CEOs of two of the largest companies in the gig economy. I think that the future of work is not going to be about creating jobs, like many politicians like to say, or about matching supply and demand through online platforms. It's going to be about creating work opportunities and the right infrastructure for people to find multiple and better alternatives than a traditional employment, and building a framework where progressive solutions can emerge. Now, last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to a sister initiative of the Tunisian Freelancers Day. It's an initiative that I'm coordinating. It's called European Freelancers Week. Last week, it took place in October, and it was the third edition. European Freelancers Week is a crowdsourced series of independent events held under a common theme and branding all across Europe. So it's the world's largest festival celebrating independent work and helping millions of Europeans to discover the potential of the freelance economy. So I encourage you to visit the website. Soon we will launch the 2019 edition, which will also include a European Freelancer Survey, a European Freelancers Manifesto, and some awards from the best freelancers in Europe. So, thank you so much for listening. About myself, among other things, I'm the Secretary General of the European Forum of Independent Professionals, which is a European association representing freelancers. I'm a freelancer myself. I have researched, keynoted, and consulted on topics related to the gig economy and the future of work for the last 15 years. And if you're also interested, or if you are also working around these issues, I would like to know you, so please get in touch. Finally, I wish you a good continuation of the conference. Enjoy being in Tunisia, and goodbye for now.